Today we're going to conclude our discussion over Editha by William Dean Howells. And then on Monday you are going to do an essay or a paragraph. You're going to have that choice as your final evaluation of this unit on characterization. And that will be a test grade, and that will conclude this unit, and we'll move on. So I hope you enjoyed the end of the story. I think you did by some of your responses. And so now we know, as we have concluded the story, what Howells was driving at. First of all, he certainly was all through the work. The subject was war, and so he was questioning the efficacy of war, and he was revealing different viewpoints of war that he found present in his own society. And then secondly, he was providing a strong contrast between realism and romanticism or idealism. And of course he was doing this because he was a leader of the movement of realism in his time. But what I do want to point out here is that during his time period, there was a resurgence of romantic thought. So that would be his motivation behind wanting to provide strong contrasts and shed positive light on the idea of realism. So on Monday, you're going to have a choice of 3 different essays to write for a test grade. And the first one is kind of a safety net for you in case you do not feel confident in writing the next 2 that follow. So we already referenced the idea of this one in the lecture. All you would need to do is identify and support a character trait of one of the characters in Editha. So, for example, now that you have met all the characters, you know that Editha is manipulative. Maybe you want to say that about her. Maybe you want to say that George is a pushover. On the other hand, you might want to say that George is thoughtful. Whatever it is that you want to say, as long as you can support it with textual evidence, because this was a unit on characterization and how authors use characters, what they think, what they say, what they do, to drive points, to reveal something about people, to reveal something about societies, and so forth. Your second choice, however, I would like you to consider answering how does characterization in Editha and another character, and I put another character so that you could choose George, but you could also choose Mrs. Gearson. How does that characterization illustrate Howells' critique of romantic idealism? And so we've talked about this already, just that Howells is a realist. He was a reigning force in that area. Well, how does he then critique idealism? How does he use Editha? How does he contrast Editha with another character? We've talked about that, how contrast can highlight. So I'm not going to go into that further, but that is something to consider as an essay. And then the last consideration or choice would be to explain Editha's and George's view on war and the factors that shaped their beliefs. And so we're going to really kind of finish up talking about that today. That would be another really good essay I can say, and I can't wait to find out which one you choose. Whenever I put out a couple of choices, it's always fun to see which essay each student chooses. So let's get into the rest of our lesson, and then I have 2 tasks for you. So we looked at this slide earlier and in the week, and we said you really couldn't possibly know the purpose because you hadn't read enough of the work. Now that you've concluded it, and now that you've annotated and really considered each of these characters and what they're saying and thinking and doing and how they're responding, I believe that you will be able to very thoroughly discuss the purpose. So I'd like to see kind of a paragraph in this spot right here where you discuss what we just on the previous slide talked about, how Howells is considering realism versus idealism and romanticism, and how he is, what kind of revealing different ideology in war, right? Those are the purposes. So you go ahead and do about a paragraph on this part. Of course, you know that I'm able during this school day and really over the weekend, really anytime I'm available. If you're kind of questioning what you should put here, please just reach out to me. But you've been doing amazing work. I am so pleased when I go back in and look at what you're doing. So I am excited to read your response to the purpose section. In the same way, we said earlier on that, yes, we knew the subject was about war. You knew that a couple of sentences in. Actually, you knew it in the first sentence, right? But now you really understand Howells and his perspectives and the contrast of the society's perspectives of his day on war. And so you should certainly be able to have several well-developed, rich sentences that really give a good discourse on war, as Howells sees it in his work. So I do want to just give you a little bit more on this, and you could take notes on that and put that in there. But I think you probably, from your annotating, it looks like you understand completely anyway that Editha has an idealistic, romantic viewpoint of war. She finds it to be glorious. She finds it to be beautifully patriotic. And so she's kind of living above the horror of war and just thinking of the romantic kind of, kind of when I picture what she must be thinking, I think of movies that you can watch on war where you're removed from it. And so you're just seeing the whole picture. And sometimes it's gruesome, but then there's the stories of the people and the relationships, and it all turns out okay in the end kind of perspective. And that's kind of where she's living, up in the clouds, away from the harsh realities of it. Whereas George, on the other hand, I need you to understand, you probably saw this in him, and I want you to make this connection if you didn't notice in your author's study. George's view actually mirrors Howells' view, and Howells was in his life tending towards a pacifist view of war. So I don't know if you noticed that though George is a realist, and so therefore he understands the horror of war, and it certainly doesn't hurt that he understands his father's tragic Civil War experience. That definitely fed into his belief and his realistic viewpoint towards war, but that is pushing him into a pacifist view. So you might not agree with that viewpoint, but that's the subject. That's the contrast here, okay? He thinks that rational man can make peaceful decisions, increasingly peaceful decisions. He kind of thinks man can become perfect, and they can sort of think their way into perfection. He does have that belief. He thinks that war is immoral, stupid, irrational. So we have total contrast in these two characters, and kind of nobody seeming to be able to put their finger on the truth of it all either. So I believe that you should be able to give me some really good content on the subject of war. We already talked about occasion, and so the other part, and I don't have it pictured on this particular slide, but the other part that I need you to fill in is God's perspective. And that brings in some more viewpoints by Editha and George. What is God's perspective? Ultimately, you need to put that there. But in this part, you can refute Editha's ideas about God's perspective that are wrong. Editha uses God to support her ideas for war. She has something that's called pocket providence. And that is where she basically is saying, war is happening. God is, we know that God is sovereign. And so she makes the jump from her reasoning that because war is happening and because God is sovereign, this is God's will. Well, that is not a correct viewpoint. You can't use God and point to something happening currently and saying, because this is happening in this world, it's God's will. because we know that God indeed is sovereign over this world. He holds this world in his hand, and he allows what's happening to go on. But it is because he is allowing people to choose. He's hoping and pulling people, calling people to choose to make choices that please him. But if he's going to allow people to have that choice to glorify him instead of just making us be robots that have to love him, he wants us to want to love him and to want to choose to do right. But in order to provide that choice to us, people aren't going to make that choice always. And so there's going to be sin enduring in this world for a season until in God's timing, he calls us home, right? And so she's incorrect in her perspective. And then George is also incorrect because he thinks that God handed war over to man without interfering at all. He thinks it's all up to man. And he kind of says it's man's fate that's causing this war. And that is not completely true either. God's perspective is far bigger than that, isn't it? And his control is far more complex than those simple thoughts of these two individuals. So I want you to evaluate their belief system in the God's perspective portion. And then I want you to tell God's true perspective on war. And if you need me to, reach out to me and I can provide you with some direction and verses. But I think I'm going to not do that initially because I would like to see what you can come up with on your own. But please don't hesitate. I'm not saying that to be like, and if, I won't mind if you can't. The Bible is a complex, amazing book, all written by our God. And so if verses aren't coming to your mind on this particular subject, I will be happy to provide you with verses. However, I do want some of you, I just want you to have that choice of being able to find them on your own. Okay? And so that is the other part of the grid that you need to fill out, and I will provide that grid to you on Google Classroom. Okay, so we've already discussed at length this learning goal, and your essay that you will be doing on Monday is directly correlated with this goal. Your essay will show me that you understand how authors use characterizations to drive their purposes and reveal what they want us to know about society and about decisions and about ideology and so forth. So you can pause it and read it again, but we are going to move on. And what I need to do now is I need you to stop this video and go to the other video to know about the other assignment. And so please just stop this video now. It's going to just stay on this learning goal for the next 2 minutes, and then it will stop on its own. But you can just stop now and go to the other video, and I will talk to you in just a second.